I'm here today with Michael Beck. Michael and I have known each other for many years and have done some work together. And he and I have been talking lately, and I wanted him to come and join us on the podcast so that we could talk a little bit about the kinds of things that Mike is seeing across the closely held and mid-market business space and the different sort of trends that are happening. And particularly, I'm really interested in some things that I'd like to talk about today connected with the idea of leadership teams and our ability to appropriately sort of assess the top management or the leadership team in a company, why we want to do that, how we should be doing that, and what we're seeing across the board as trends. So Mike, I'll let you kind of give me a little bit about, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and where you're from?
You bet. And thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me today. So I've been an executive coach and doing leadership development for a little over 20 years right now. And prior to that, did all sorts of things, and it held all kinds of executive roles in finance and business development in various industries, lived overseas doing it as well. And then got into professional executive coaching. And then over the years, my business has begun shifting towards transition work. And that's how Elizabeth and I first connected. I used to live in Denver and participate in BEI events, and I network around the country. And so we thought some of the insights that I've been gathering, excuse me, as I've networked around the country and done some research might be worthwhile sharing today.
Right. And so I think, we are constantly being asked questions and asked for resources from both business owners and business advisors alike about, what are we seeing as the trends in planning for the future of a closely held business? And also, what do we think are the things that are the most important, and what can business owners do today that will help them be better prepared for whatever transition they have? And so first, let's talk about kind of your perspective that you come from, because I think it helps us kind of understand the advice that you have for advisors and business owners alike. So let's talk about, where are you coming from? So what is everyone has a take on the market and a take on the data. Tell me what yours is so that we can kind of set the scene.
Great. I would love to. It's something I'm passionate about and have been talking about for a couple of years now. So, I mean, everyone has talked about the boomer wave, the silver tsunami, whatever you want to call it, and also have kind of been wondering, where is it? Because it's apparent it hasn't really kicked in full force. And so after thinking about it quite a bit and researching, here's what I've come to understand, is that, let's say back in the 1970s, life expectancy was about 72 years old, and people were retiring at 65. Well, now life expectancy is about 10 years older, and people are retiring about 10 years later. Many of the advisors I speak with around the country say their clients are in their mid-70s when they're retiring. Having said that, the leading edge of the baby boom turns 75 this year in 2021. And so, as near as I can tell, and talking with again, advisors around the country, this wave has begun. It began at the end of last year. And I predict it's going to increase significantly year after year for the next 3 or 4 years and stay at a very high level. So that's exciting for everybody. And it's a good reason for us to be talking about this today. But there's another side to this that I really want to talk about, because I think it's critical. And I'll give you the short version. There are about 4.5% of boomers own a business, own a company that employs people, and about 3% of Gen Xers, the tier below, own a business. So the fact that one's 3, one's 4.5, and it's not that surprising, and human nature being what it is, you'd expect that the Gen Xers percentage would rise to 4.5% as well. And so it's not surprising until you think about it, and then it becomes alarming. And I want to explain why it's alarming. That rise in going from 3 to 4.5% only represents 1/3 of the boomer businesses. And that means 2/3 of the boomer businesses will not find a buyer, an individual buyer. It's math. So I've had people say, yeah, but there's a lot of money chasing deals and there's strategic acquisitions. And that's all very true. And from all the research I've done, you can do your own. Typically, the close rate on those deals, private equity, M&A, strategic acquisition, it ranges from 15 to 25% close rate. Let's be generous and say 25% of the remaining businesses find money, find a deal. If you do the math, all you need is paper and pencil. You take the 2/3 of the boomer businesses that can't find a buyer, say 3/4 of those won't find money. It calculates to a full 50% of boomer businesses will not find a buyer and will not find money in the coming years. It's a huge number. That leads us to our conversation today.
Yeah, and I think that we're seeing data that is, very similar. People can agree or disagree with your approach to the numbers, but the fact is that lots of businesses, a high percentage of businesses do not find buyers, end up being shut down. That's going to continue to be true. It's probably the same percentage that you're talking about, and that everyone in the business space, business planning space, business transaction space will say that there's a significant percentage of businesses that are just not good candidates for whatever reason. And so what you and I are trying to do is we're trying to give advisors and owners advice that will help them get out of the category, the percentage of businesses that are just not good candidates for a future transaction, and get them into the category of the businesses that are great candidates, great targets, very ideal, very desirable.
Yep.
And that it doesn't matter to us whether they want to transition ownership to their kids or their employees or a private equity firm or a strategic buyer. It doesn't really make any difference to us. We just want to create businesses that are able to kind of write their own ticket. And right?
Yeah, no question. I was going to add even more color to support what you just said, because I've been working with a number of the wealth management companies around the country, UBS and RBC and Bernstein. And one of the interesting other statistics is that typically 85 to 90% of a business owner's wealth is tied up in that business. And if they can't sell it, their wealth disappears. And so as advisors, I think we have an obligation to help owners as best we can pull that wealth out for their own benefit. And everybody wins. We get clients and get paid. They get their wealth. The company stays in business. The families who get employed stay employed. And so I think it's a very admirable thing to do. But the problem is many owners are very complacent about this right now. And so I think our job as advisors is to begin sounding the bell.
Yep, it's true. So why don't we just do it right now? Okay, let's say, I have a company, I've done really well. My company is profitable, so that's good. I figure check that one off. It's growing, I can check that off. I have successfully delegated a lot of what I do to some other people because I know that that's a thing I'm supposed to do as an owner. So check that off. I'm in an industry that is expected to do well. I can check that off. So, pretty much I'm good and I don't really need to do anything is maybe what I'm thinking. But if we look a little bit more closely, maybe I haven't done all the steps that I should. So let's say I get connected with you and Like, what are the things that business owners should really be focusing on, thinking about, maybe paying closer attention to? Because if I've got people and they seem to be doing a good job, is that not enough? Why is that not enough?
Good question. And let me clarify something. We don't do exit planning. We don't do planning, succession planning, strategic stuff. We do leadership development and leadership assessment, successor development, successor recruiting. So typically, we get involved when an advisor, like perhaps one who's listening to this podcast right now, is, or if an owner is listening to this and they're working with an advisor, that person would be helping them appreciate what they need to be looking at. To that point, I always encourage advisors to help their clients understand they need to do a preliminary due diligence. And a due diligence is typically poking at the business the way a potential buyer would. Do it in advance of going to market so you uncover any issues. That's what you're getting at. And so I always encourage advisors to encourage them, the client, to, number one, do a quality of earnings report, and number two, a quality of leadership report. Now, the quality of earnings uncovers a lot of what you were talking about, where things where an owner has blind spots. They don't realize that they've got a market concentration or a customer concentration, or the business is dependent really on one or two key people that may or may not stay. And there's a whole slew of things that a proper quality of earnings report will look at. The reason they need to be doing this due diligence in advance is because as that surplus of businesses grows in the market, buyers are going to become less willing to compromise. They don't need to, with so many businesses to choose from. They're going to try to drive down multiples, and they'll be much more selective. So we need to make sure our clients are positioned as strongly as possible before going into market. So the due diligence, the quality of earnings report needs to be done in advance. We developed a quality of leadership report. Our research has shown, in talking with business valuation experts around the country, that the quality of the leadership team affects price as much as 15 to 20%, a very large amount. And every owner is going to claim their leadership team is great and not a problem. And of course, buyers don't always see it quite that way. So what we did, as an example, is we created this quality of leadership report where we do a comprehensive 360-degree assessment of each leader, and then consolidate it into a team report, the quality of leadership report. And what that does is one of two things. Either it highlights a problem so you can address it before you go to market. Because again, I think once the surplus builds, if a buyer sees an issue, they're not going to try to figure out how to work with it. They're just going to move on to the next candidate. So either it's going to highlight a problem so you can address it, or you end up with a significant objective assessment of the leadership team. You can hand a written document to the buyer and say, no need to take my word for it. Here's a report, objective 360 report. Mm-hmm. It produces a 30 to 40 page report on each of the leaders, and a summary sheet showing a heat map. It shows highlights and lowlights. And so it's an excellent tool.
Well, I had a chance to take a look at one of these before we talked, and they're just really interesting, and assessing each person on the leadership team, probably not new. Maybe people have done something like that before. They did some kind of assessment as part of their team meeting some time ago or something like that. But putting it together for the purpose of explaining the quality of the leadership team to a buyer is something that I really just have not heard about. And I looked through some of the categories that you're evaluating, and so I have some questions about that.
Go for it.
Are all different kinds of things, so many different categories that you're looking at. And I noticed that some of them are kind of the things we think about. I'm from kind of a left brain-ish kind of a background or perspective. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, it's obviously about, their performance and their skill set and their ability to, I don't know, to process information and to think strategically and things like that. So that's on your report, these sort of traditional kind of things we think of as leadership qualities and things like that. Then there's a bunch of other things on the report too, that are things like, empathy and and a person's ability to, I can't remember what it's called, emotional sort of stability and
Emotional control.
and yeah, like connections and things like that. And so, how are these two things? This is what I really want to know more about. How are these two things working together? I assume it's it's very much the case, from what I can tell, that the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so when you're looking at a leadership team, like, does everyone have to be really empathetic? Do we just have to have enough of it? And how does that connect to and maybe enhance those more traditional leadership skills? What is going on with these different, very, very diverse types of areas that you're measuring?
Good questions. So let me put it in a context here. I think one of the challenges with how an owner develops people, whether it's a successor, in other words, someone internal to run the company, or they prepare their leadership team to continue on after they're gone. I think often owners help them master the mechanics of the business. So they're very good at doing the business. But those things actually don't teach them leadership and strategy and even ownership thinking. And so the assessment goes into that a little bit more. I mean, one of the things about leadership, it's really interesting. Years ago, before I wrote my leadership book, I got thinking as to, everyone talks about the fact that leadership is important and here's how you become a better leader, but no one really wrote about why leadership actually does make that difference. And what I realized is that great leadership brings out the best in people. That's why I entitled my book Eliciting Excellence. The thing of it is that a great leader, an effective leader, needs to be good at the interpersonal things, being empathetic. I'm not saying at all that they need to be touchy-feely or that they need to accept mediocrity, just the opposite. Mm-hmm. The most successful, hard-driving companies, the leaders are excellent at their interpersonal skills. They understand the difference between strategies and tactics. And many, many executives I've worked with over 20 years do not understand the difference. And if you, for instance, try to solve a symptom instead of the underlying problem, you end up with more problems, more issues. And so all these things together elevate someone from an excellent manager of the business to a leader of the business.
Right. And what it seems like one of the things you might be saying, so correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can have a person who has great technical skills or great, let's say, even strategic thinking, or vision, and that's extremely valuable. But if they don't have some of these other skills that allow them to bring everyone else with them, the company's not going to perform at its highest level. And same, if I'm really highly skilled or qualified or rated in some of the softer, more human aspects of leadership, but I don't understand strategy, or I don't have the vision for what the company should do, then I'm also going to fail as a leader, right?
Exactly right on both counts. So there's a saying in our profession that culture eats strategy for lunch, which is a cute way of saying what you said. You can have the greatest strategy in the world, but if you don't get buy-in, which comes from the culture, if you don't get buy-in, you get mediocre results. And rather to have a well-executed, modest strategy than a fantastic strategy poorly executed, right?
Right.
So I think it is critical to have a good strategic thinking approach, so you end up with good strategies. But if you don't get buy-in, you don't get the results you want. And there's a big difference between, I'll call it compliance and commitment. And so a leader, the owner of a company, can say, well, you know what, this is what we're doing, now go and do it. And he will get compliance. He or she will get compliance. And many owners and leaders do that. That's their style. Problem is that gap between compliance and commitment. A committed workforce will go the extra mile. They'll be more resourceful, and you get better results. It's been proven over and over again over time. And so you really, if you want to be a great leader, whether you're going to end up as the owner of the company or you're going to be a key leader in a newly acquired company, it's essential to both be able to, of course, to know the business, but again, to think strategically, to be able to get buy-in, to have these high interpersonal skills, and of course, good decision making as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, can you give me any, it doesn't have to be your number one example, but just maybe, from the last company that you worked with or something that you've been seeing. Can you give me an example of one of the most common areas where you are seeing a leadership team really need to make some changes? And I don't know if it's possible in a short podcast, what's the first step that they make towards that change? But what's the area or one of the areas where it's most likely that a company's leadership team is going to be in need of support?
Thank you. Thanks for asking. And I've seen this in a number of clients over in the recent year or two. It just seems that no matter how good they are in their job, how good they are in getting results in the area they are responsible for, they have a very hard time thinking expansively. In other words, instead of thinking narrowly in their own department, to ask them to think about the betterment of the entire company and the implications to different departments within the company, they seem to have a very hard time doing that. And of course, that's a problem. And so, I mean, frankly, some are able to make that shift and others aren't. And so, I mean, coaching isn't magic. You can't take someone who's not well suited to a position and make them suited. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to tell them this is not a good person for this role. Other times, I mean, in many times over the last 20 years, you can take somebody who's open to shifting. They're bright. They want to be better, and they just blossom.
And so let's say if I, I've had my head down, I've been focusing on, growing the sales of the business, and I'm on the leadership team, but I don't really understand the product development side because we've been really, respectful of each other's areas, and there's somebody else who's responsible for that. But now you've come in and you've identified that we're a little bit too siloed on our leadership team, and we don't have the ability to think or integrate issues from each other's areas of expertise or responsibility. Then what's the first thing you're going to tell us to do? Do we have to go shadow each other? Do we need to go have lunch with each other? What's the first thing we're going to do in this particular example of needing to be more aware of each other's areas?
I'm thinking a drum circle would help.
Absolutely.
No, but in all seriousness.
And right after that.
Yes. No, and that's a good question. And typically these issues aren't arising until there's a plan that's starting to be put into place. So you don't have years and years and years to work on this, right? And everyone's busy, very busy anyway. And so shadowing, no one can afford the time to shadow effectively. It's a good strategy, but not for this. So I always recommend that the owner be involved in helping to expand their vision and their thinking. So for instance, if you had a weekly session where the owner sat down with the 2 or 3 leaders right below and helped them each understand what the other was going through and strategize with one another, but the owner is the catalyst to that. So often in these situations, I'm actually coaching the owner as well as maybe 1 or 2 of the executives, because the owner has to do this just right.
Sure, and I guess, and I would say it's been my observation that the owner often does understand multiple areas of the business because they had to be responsible for those in the early days. So what you're saying is that the owner can be sort of the connector or the translator between
Absolutely.
different people on the leadership team to get them where they're trying to go.
In fact, I distinguish between coaching and mentoring. So I predominantly do coaching, and my team, we do coaching. But there's certain things, mentoring things, that only the owner can do. Only the owner can allow them, for instance, to make a decision. I can't allow them to make a decision for the company. Only the owner can share past mistakes and the lessons that they learned. Only the owner can communicate, clarify the company's culture and what it means and why it's important. I can sort of poke at it, but the owner's the master of that. So if we really want to develop successors or develop a leadership team that's a rock star on a takeover, the owner needs to play an important role in that besides getting coached. Because as a coach, I can say things to an executive that the owner can't say, right? Because they know I'm on their side and I can beat them up if I need to beat them up. Where the owner, I mean, there are all these dynamics and blind spots and history and stuff. So both of us play a role.
Right. Well, I think that this is ultimately, all of this is bringing us back full circle to the reason why we plan, which is that making change takes time. Making change is worth it. As you pointed out a few minutes ago, can have a significant effect on the bottom line in this conversation. That's the value of the business. And my experience with business owners is that they want the best for their company and their family and their employees, and they are dissatisfied with anything less than the best that they can possibly do. So so I think it's probably well worth it for us to maybe learn a little bit more about doing something that's like quality of leadership. I think it's a really interesting idea and something that could make a measurable, quantifiable, really, difference in the value of a business or its likelihood to succeed in a transition.
And let me add to that. It's extraordinarily affordable. It's very reasonably priced, because I think it's a good service to provide. Our main business is development and recruiting of successors. So this quality of leadership report, it's just good to do. It's really pretty inexpensive.
Perfect.
And I created PDFs of sample reports and sample quality of leadership, sample individual reports from that people can download on our website. I think you have it on the BEI website, don't you?
Yes, if you can go to, for listeners who want to go to exitplanning.com, go to our podcast page and all the resources connected there along with the in the place where you find this recording. And tell us again, what is your website, Mike?
Oh, our website is elicitingexcellence.com. ELICITING excellence.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate you being here today. This is a topic that we've not spent a lot of time talking about, but it's pretty much a deal maker or breaker for a lot of businesses. So it's absolutely critical. I hope that we can talk about it more. I would really encourage people who are listening, if you're an advisor or a business owner, go take a look at the sample reports because they're fascinating. And while they won't tell you what's going on in your company, it will immediately start the wheels turning. That's what it did for me. So thinking about yourself and how you fit into these and the people on your team. So Mike, I appreciate you being here today. This has been really great. I hope that we get to do it again. And your resources are just extremely valuable. So thanks for the work that you're doing.
And thank you so much for having me today, Elizabeth. I enjoyed it as well.
Okay. Thanks everyone for listening today. We'll see you next time.